Good afternoon. Welcome to this week's episode of Safety Culture Solutions, brought to you by Safety Culture Strategies. I'm Mike Kinney, your host. In our various episodes, we talk about many facets of safety culture, especially a positive one. Because you hear my tagline, everybody's got a culture, but is it the one you want? So we get leaders throughout industry, safety practitioners, and every once in a while we all get some great talent I'm going to have with us today. That is Mr. or Dr. Matt Petzold. He has been referred to as the godfather of talent optimization and is the vice president of partner growth at the Predictive Index, the leading talent optimization platform. He has served in product and partner empowerment roles at the Predictive Index for the past 8 years. He holds a PhD in psychology from Capella University and is a U.S. Marine. Thank you for your service. And Ironman triathlon finisher, man. Just reading that, I'm getting tired. He's also the host of Lead the People, a leadership variety podcast of his own, and a frequent LinkedIn author. Matt, welcome aboard. Glad to have you on the show with us today, sir.
Mike, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Wow. So I got it. Before we get into the rest of this, you did an Ironman. Wow. So how long did that took a while to kind of prepare? You probably didn't think about Thursday, I think I'll do an Ironman on Saturday. You probably had to train a little bit or prepare.
Definitely did. I was a very slow runner. I couldn't swim the length of the pool, and I didn't own a bike. And I thought, you know what, Ironman is for me. So it took about 4 years of training is how long it took me. And the event itself was, I finished in just under 16 hours. So that was a very long day, but I was so glad that I did it.
Well, congratulations. I want to thank you for your service again. So the Ironman, so what time, just for our viewers, what you start like maybe 10 or 11 in the morning, you're done by 3 or 4 in the afternoon? Probably not.
No, not me. I tell you, the gun goes off at 7 a.m. and they go through the waves. All the fast people are in front. So it's a while before they let me go out the starting gate. But they reset everybody's times, and then you just go through. And some of the fastest athletes will finish in a matter of anywhere from 10 to 12 hours, depending on the course. But you have to complete it in less than 17 hours or it doesn't count. So I was able to complete relatively comfortably. We'll call it that.
Excellent. Well, congratulations. So now you got the T-shirt, been there, done that, and you have it on your pedigree, right?
Exactly right. I was one and done. It was fantastic.
So you got it, so we're good enough. And obviously we want to be talking about safety culture, and what fascinates me with what your company's doing, it's always a pleasure to chat with you about this, is through this software approach, for lack of a better phrase, is you all are able to help leaders and HR figure out who's some appropriate talent for some positions in the company. Is that a good way to kind of 50,000 foot look?
Yeah, I'd say at the 50,000 feet, the work that we do is all about leadership and organizational psychology. Basically, what do we know about people inside of organizations, and how can we use that knowledge to really help improve all types of different business outcomes? What we know from our work with clients in a variety of different areas is that when it comes to mindset, the choices that people make, any sort of actions they take, and those consequences, it's all driven by basically who we are and how we're wired. So when we think about safety, there's obviously a behavioral basis for safety, and I think those are some of the topics that we're going to be talking about today.
You're right on target. It's fascinating because you guys have been around since, what was it, 1955, 56-ish?
Exactly, 1955. It's a long-standing tradition and a tremendous amount of utility from the tools. Obviously, the software that we've invented since has really been in the areas of the applied science. So how do we put information in front of managers so that they can make the best choices about who to hire, how to inspire those people, what is the behavioral basis of safety, all those great things.
Excellent. So from your perspective, and you are eminently qualified in this, what do you see as some of the key attributes for a positive safety culture?
I think one thing is that I heard you say that it has to be intentional. Very true. We have to be deliberate about our values, about the types of things that we want to really have our culture be all about. And to me, in my work with executive teams, we have to remember that our culture is what we reward and punish. And so if there are behaviors that we tolerate, that's speaking a lot louder than anything we might put on our placards up in our conference rooms or in our factories and these sorts of things. What are we being consistent about reinforcing in terms of those rewards and punishment to really reinforce a culture assuming that you deliberately designed it in the first place.
Very well put. And you and I've chatted before. I've had the pleasure working with many, many companies across the United States. And some plants, when you pull up and you see the big giant poster, safety's job one, I mentally kind of wince because,
Yeah.
and I always want to get perspective from very qualified individuals like yourself. What I've found with a lot of the craft, they see that poster, and to be kind, I'm not sure how well it resonates with them because they know there has to be some competing priorities and there has to be a balance. Is that a good way to put it?
A very good way to put it. I think it's easy to become blind to those things, right? To just see them so often, they almost become meaningless. And it's kind of assumed that, yeah, of course we want to be safe. But you mentioned what I like to call not just competing priorities, I call them competing goals. That's the thing that I have seen really cause challenges in organizations. When we say something's important, like safety, quality, timeliness, customer service, whatever it might be, it's not that that stops being true, but sometimes those things get overshadowed by competing goals around innovation or collaboration or speed or something else. Maybe a market competitor is making some moves and it's causing a threat. And then those things start to overshadow something like safety, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely correct. So again, this kind of segues right into what you guys do on a daily basis. Well, that's probably one of the most critical skills for the leader of an organization to help establish or sustain a positive safety culture.
Well, there's four things that I always say that every leader must do. The first is being able to design winning teams. So in the example where we start talking about safety, how do we make sure that we understand a dynamic among a complex team? And you could have lots of different roles working together to produce an outcome. Well, some of those people are going to be naturally wired for safe behaviors, and others may not be. So how do you manage that team cohesion when you have a mix of personalities, for example, on the team, or when you have a complex set of goals that you have to achieve when safety is only one of them? That's the first example. The second is hiring top talent. When we start looking at individuals, how do we make sure we choose people who are naturally prone to and wired to be safe, right? To make decisions in the moment, to really, demonstrate those sort of qualities that we're really looking for. A lot of times, especially for early career professionals, they may not have much of a resume. You may be making a hiring decision based on not a lot of information. How can you get information about their natural behavioral drives, their motivations, to be able to make the right decision? The next is, how do we inspire people to greatness? So when you work with anybody on the payroll, how do we really manage them the way that they need to be managed and give them what they need and fulfill their needs? And often I find that some of the most common safety jobs, for example, need heavy amounts of reinforcement, time to process change. They need detailed communication about why something's happening. And that's, unfortunately, for some, the last thing they get, because other types of people in the organization are trying to drive things very quickly and move mountains of ways. And then the last one real quick, Mike, is around diagnosing problems. There's always going to be problems that crop up in an organization. How do we take the data, analyze it objectively, and really choose those improvement actions to be able to get back on track? Those are the things I think every leader must be able to do, those four things.
Excellent. So I got to kind of pick your brain a little bit. I think first one you mentioned, Matt's really got my interest. Can you expound a little bit more on being able to hire top talent? Because I really like that phrase, by the way.
Yeah, when we take a look at a job, I always like to start with the job before I start with the candidates or the people. And I want to really understand like what's really required in this role. And sometimes, unfortunately, I see clients of ours or just employers in general who will have an idea of a job, and maybe two people have very different opinions of what the job requires. So, the safety manager is saying we need somebody who's going to execute processes and our guidebooks, to the letter. That way it's going to keep everybody safe. But then someone else for the same role says, yeah, but they've got to be really good with customers, or they've got to be, really innovative and ready to take on new challenges. And you're like, okay, how are we going to get both of those things that are very different in the same person? Like we may be set up, to struggle even before we have a single candidate. Let's get to agreement about what the job really entails and not look for some unicorn person to be able to do all these magic things, right? That's where we start with the job. And then after that, it gets a little bit more straightforward.
But what strikes me with this is akin to when I had other featured guests on, like the importance of clearly planning the work you're going to perform well, and I think this scenario is almost identical. Clearly, we'll be able to clearly articulate what are those key roles and responsibilities before you start trying to interview people.
Absolutely. Mike, I call it what's the work to be done and who's doing the work. Two sides of the same coin.
Oh, wow.
Often we gloss over the first. We need a job description for this forklift operator. Let's just go on to Indeed or Google and
There you
just
go.
copy and paste a
Copy
bunch
and
of stuff
paste.
into my job description. Oh my God. You're like, no, wait a second. How about we talk to people who are going to be working with this individual, make sure we're all agreed on what success in the role requires, and then we can move forward, in the context of our business. What makes sense
Good.
at our plant or at our firm? That's important.
That is critical. And there's a couple of the processes that you all have in place. Can you give us a little bit insight? Because the behavioral, I'm looking at some of my notes, the behavioral assessment and the cognitive assessment. So I practice cognitive so I could get it right the first time, Doc. Hope you appreciate that. So can you kind of articulate what each of those are and just how they help an organization?
Yeah, the behavioral assessment is all about how do we understand the motivating drives that an individual has. Some people have drives that for things like dominance. How do I actually have some impact over my environment? How do I make changes? How do I break down barriers and affect change? Others have a drive for extroversion. That happens to be my highest drive. Working with and through other people is really important to those people. And then when others have a drive for something we call patience, which is around familial or the routine or social ties inside of an organization. And finally, formality, which to us is all about process, precision, reliable, consistent work. That's, again, those last two are where a lot of the safety jobs really start to crop up in terms of the importance of those drivers. When we understand what someone's motivating needs are, we understand how they're predictably going to act in most situations, all things being equal. So that's an important part of what makes people tick. And when you hire somebody who's naturally prone to safe behavior, to take on a safety role, it's very smooth and very easy in terms of the behavior that flows. That's why it's important to understand people and how they're naturally, what their motivating needs naturally are, so that we can make the most natural choices.
Wow. So excellent. So the cognitive piece of that, because I got to rewind, because here's here's a shout or a flash for you. I am somewhat of an extrovert, go figure, just like yourself. But obviously, when you have the people that have more of that patience, alignment, essentially when I'm working with customers, I have the energy of an Irish setter with the attention span of a gerbil. So I love the whiteboards and my magic markers when we go to work. And once I kind of figure out the process, it's usually better if they got somebody else that's really good at putting the nuts on the bolts, because I get kind of bored, right? So it's a great insight on this behavioral assessment, because then when you have that mix of your cadre, well, then you're going to have the free range thinkers like yourself, and then the people that really enjoy that day to day and that they are very reliable. They take pride in what they do. And so when you have a team like that together, now you're on the path to success.
Yeah, they balance one another, and you really start to appreciate the strengths of what the other person brings to the table. Like you, I found that in my career, I need to surround myself with people who are grown-ups. They're really good at that detail work. They're very thorough people, and I always do better when I'm partnered with them.
Yes.
And they appreciate in me being visionary and talking to customers and doing all these things, because they don't really enjoy that. It drains them, but it energizes me. And I appreciate that they're able to make sure that I don't drive us into the ditch. So only when you have that sort of appreciation for differences, and we even celebrate those differences, that's the behavioral kind of balancing and complementary strengths that many, many team environments need. It's very rare that you see that a single individual working in isolation does really important things inside of an organization. The most interesting work is team-based work, which means you're going to have multiple objectives and multiple personality types working together on them.
Absolutely correct. And one of the organizations I was supporting a few years ago, they had brought in a team to kind of help identify personality types. And what really resonated with me, Matt, I think they had like group A, B, C, and D. And so the A is the free range thinkers like yourself, and the D, they're the nut on the boat people. And so they kind of figured out what you were, and then the next morning they put all the group A's together, all the group B's and so forth. The group A's, we kind of figured out world hunger in about 10 minutes, and now we're ready for the next challenge. The group D, they were kind of waiting for a bit more just direction. How can we successfully put the nut on the bolt? And that was many years ago, and it still resonates with me. It was a great example of just, like say, you got to have that mix. We're going to take a short break. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. We're going to learn a whole bunch more. What's going on with the folks at Predictive Index. We'll be right back.
Safety Culture Strategies provides world-class safety culture and safety program management consultative services for clients throughout the United States. Whether your company is pursuing Voluntary Protection Program STAR designation, ISO 45001 certification, or considering a comprehensive review of your current safety programs and processes, Safety Culture Strategies brings hands-on experience combined with a unique perspective that readily translates from senior management to task-level personnel. This collective skill set provides you with a very insightful health check of your overall safety management system that can also assist with reducing injuries and attrition, as well as increasing profitability. Safety Culture Strategies is also certified to provide Ziegler Institute employee engagement training and leadership coaching. When combined with established relationships with federal and state regulators, Safety Culture Strategies is uniquely positioned to assist the safety culture efforts of any company. For additional information, visit www.scstrat.com or call us at 702-780-1410. After all, every company has a safety culture, but is it the culture you want?
Hey, we're back. We got Matt Pepsell with us from Predictive Index, and we were talking before break about the behavioral assessment and how it does a great job capturing those motivating needs, just kind of what makes people's internal engines fire up every day. So the cognitive assessment, that's probably a little different tool. Can you give me some additional insight?
Yeah, it's just a little bit of a different tool in the sense that when we've been talking this conversation so far about behavior and what are our behavioral drives, separate from that is cognitive ability. So think about how quickly you can acquire information, apply that information, that type of learning strategies, et cetera. What's your basic capacity? Think of it like filling up a sponge, right? Some people have this innate ability to just absorb information very quickly, start putting it to use. Others, they can get there, it just takes a little bit longer in many cases. And some can handle, for example, levels of complexity and complex thinking and layers and thinking into the future to develop long-range plans that are just more advanced than some other people. So again, it's very similar in the sense that what's required for success in the role? Do we need somebody who has this complex capabilities about reasoning or about speed of processing, whatever it might be, whatever the cognitive ability is? Or is that not something that's required in this role? Let's be clear about the job target in cognitive terms before we start looking at candidates and finding out what their cognitive ability is. If you find someone who has less cognitive ability naturally than what the job target requires, they may struggle in terms of the speed at which you need to come up with new information during times of great change or in times of complexity, whatever it might be. So that's why we want to understand that ability.
Well, and what's fascinates me, there was a recent Gallup article, and if you have like 10 people, one, maybe two of them just has that natural talent to become that leader, and maybe two or three more with a little bit of mentoring and guidance, and the balance they might better serve in another role in the company, which again, I think is an area that Predictive Index can assist any organization to be able to kind of sort that out as they go through their talent acquisition process.
Yeah, there's two things I always say. One is that we must never pigeonhole people and say that they can't do something, right? So people can stretch, so even as an example, you and I have been talking about being highly extroverted, we can be detail oriented, perhaps in doses, perhaps when we need to be, if something's really important and in short bursts, so long as we're sufficiently motivated to do so, right? But the second thing that we must never do is set people up to fail. Asking you or I to work in a cubicle by ourselves with detailed documents all day long would just crush our soul, right? So it's like that. Don't do that. But so it's somewhere in between the two where we say, if someone wants to be a leader, I don't care what their personality type is, with the right coaching, mentorship, the right investment on their part, they can lead, right? Their style might be different than yours or mine, but ultimately, if they have that motivation, we don't want to limit them artificially. But again, you don't want to ask somebody to lead and say, hey, I've got one of my really safe employees. Let's just make them the foreman of a crew. If that's not what they really want, that's going to be a problem.
And unfortunately, a lot of times you'll see that happen. Well, he's been great turning tools. So we're going to make him into the foreman or superintendent. Excuse me. And people, and it just may not be a right innate fit. So from your experience and insight, what you're learning from your companies, is it possible to actually measure the difference from having a positive safety culture?
I think the measurement it's simple, but it's not easy. And the reason I say that is because I like to say every business problem is a people problem. And when you start looking at something that looks like a technical issue, or maybe we see that the incident rate is going up, or we see that a defect rate in a different aspect of quality is going down, or whatever it might be, then we can always trace it back to what was the role of people in in producing that result. So in the case of trying to produce safety outcome, of course, we're going to do everything we can around education. We're going to try to wire in processes. We're going to supply workers with equipment. Those things are really important. But again, it comes down to what is the individual's motivation? Are they the right fit for the role? How is the manager or the leader educating and managing them to produce those safety outcomes? And that's why I would extend it on your show here, Mike, and say every safety problem is a people problem. Like we have to do the hard work of trying to trace it back to its source when we don't see the result that we want.
Absolutely correct. And unfortunately, with a lot of the senior management, they make the decisions and they're kind of number-based people. So lower injury rates are really good. Higher injury rates are really bad. So if they have low injury rates, everything's good and they probably don't need to do much more. And so all the discussions about antecedents and precursors, it can sometimes fall on deaf ears.
And I think that you brought up earlier about competing priorities, or what I call competing goals. I had a very simple example of my local grocery store. During the pandemic, right in the middle, they realized that people wanted to do a lot of curbside pickup. And so I watched as they started to, every week when I'd come back, they were retrofitting a part of the front of the store to support a really dramatic increase in online orders. And they started installing freezer units and shelving. And I'm looking, and it didn't look like they really had a lot of confidence at first at what they were trying to do. So if I look at that entire incident from a safety perspective, I know somewhere at the regional level, perhaps, there's someone who's looking at numbers and saying, our competitors have online ordering already. We got to get in the game. Someone else who's responsible for safety saying, yes, but how are we going to make sure that the shelves are going to hold the weight that we need when we start stacking them with groceries? Or how are we going to educate the workers about how to be safe when there could be like new spills? Who knows? And the reality is that people who look at the numbers are going to be like, I don't have time for that. I've got to get these numbers up because I'm being judged about something else. And now all of a sudden we create an unsafe environment, unfortunately, where someone could get hurt. Yes. So it's like, how do we say, okay, time out. We can't accomplish both. Yes. How do we approach the right way to get that done? And working with experts like yourself, it's possible. But if we just allow the competition to happen, unfortunately, we're not going to get those safety outcomes.
And what resonates with the story you just shared, I had a delivery yesterday from a company that we won't name, and they had the large vans with all the boxes, and he opens up the back, and it looks like that he had barrel rolled this thing down the freeway for about a half a mile. And there's boxes, a lot on the shelves, a whole bunch on the floor. He had to move them out of the way to the one he wanted, and he talked about boxes sliding up to where he sits when he's driving. And they said, a few weeks before, they said, well, let's see a safe approach. And they realized they couldn't put as many boxes in their vehicles, so they decided, well, we won't worry about the other strategy. And just the body language of that driver, I wish I could have captured on video, because you could just sense how disappointed he was. And it's my message to management, and we have a lot of practitioners that view the show as well. Thank you very much. Just keep persevering and different ways to get your management's attention, because the majority of the time when you clearly plan it and you execute it safely, you're going to be will have some benefits as well on business processes.
Well, and as you know, Mike, I have a military background. In the Marine Corps, every once in a while, we would run into an issue and we would call it what's known as a safety stand down. Cool. And they would say nothing rolls or flies or floats until we get back to safety. And unfortunately, that would often happen whenever there was an incident, right? It's too late, obviously. Yes, but I think that even if you weren't involved in the incident, your unit, you still went and took that opportunity to go back to what keeps us safe, because that had to be the foundation. And if we got a little bit away from that because we had started to honor other priorities around speed or mobility or whatever it might be, and someone got hurt, then you might end up in a safety stand-down situation. And I would encourage the same thing for business leaders. If there's a safety outcome that unfortunately it's a little bit too late when it happens, like, call time out. Let's have a stand-down. Let's figure out what happened. How do we prevent this from happening next time?
And it's a great insight as well. And for other parts of that company, maybe that they weren't directly involved in it. Well, just what do they see as a potential upset conditions in the future? Or maybe there's some processes or techniques they know that they could probably improve upon. Great approach. I got to ask, this is one of my favorite questions. So when you reflect back on your career, who would you want to recognize, give a shout out to as one of your mentors or someone who has influenced the trajectory to where you've landed now? Because you're doing this amazing work, sir.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. One of my greatest mentors, his name is Bruce Reading. He was a guy that just invested a ton in me when I was at a very formative time in terms of coming up in the ranks and really learning the craft of leadership. And one of the things that he said to me was, make it easy for people to do the right thing. And so when you start providing situations where you've hired the right person, if they're a natural fit, it's going to be easier for them to do the right thing. If you start to surround them and give them the education they need, you create the context, protect them from those competing priorities, like the truck driver that you had that you observed. Then all of a sudden, if we do everything we can to make it easy for people to do the right thing, we're going to be happy with those outcomes. And that's our job as leaders, is to be able to do exactly that.
Excellent. So I've always got to take a few notes when you and I chat, because it is kind of getting a drink of water from a fire hose, but this is always fascinating. And I come back and I'll type some more stuff to make sure I don't forget it. It's that gerbil brain we talked about earlier. So, well, before we get out of here today, because time flies by when we have guests like you, how do people get a hold of you, Matt?
Yeah, so the easiest way, as you mentioned at the top, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you if you have any follow-on questions, or if you're interested in learning more about leadership. I share very regularly my tips and observations from studying the craft. So just look for Matt Pepsel on LinkedIn, and that's the best way to get in touch with me.
Excellent. So before we close, you're at a national conference. I think you've done one or two of those in your stellar career. So you get finished and you have the 15 minutes of Q&A and people are cheering, they're chanting your names. The halls are reverberating with excitement. So as you go to leave and start the autograph session, what's 2 or 3 things you hope they really recall to write down in their notebooks and take back to their companies?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I want to see executives in particular do is to really look at the leaders inside the organization and ask, are we giving these leaders the data that they need, the tools they need, the techniques that they need to do what we're asking them to do? So it all starts with making sure people have the right tools for the job. And if your craft is leadership, then you need tools as well. And then I think also encouraging any leader at any level to say, look, if you're going to be a leader, by definition, you have to dedicate yourself to the people part of your craft. When I was early in my career, I was a pretty crappy manager because I focused almost exclusively on the technical aspects of what I thought leadership was. It was only when I started to introduce the people aspects and really understand my people deeply, start to use that privileged relationship I had with them to really invest in them and grow them, that I really started to see breakthrough results in my career. So be just as interested in the people part of your craft if you're going to truly be an organizational leader as you are in the technical bits. And I think that those are a couple of things I would really encourage for any organization of any size, in virtually every industry that we have.
I've had the pleasure in sitting with some senior team when they would have like their monthly meeting, and the craft would be there, and there might be 30 or 40 people, and I'd get the chance to talk a little bit. And it was fascinating, man. Like, it might be an iron worker, what we call a tin knocker, sheet metal worker. And I said, well, how's your daughter doing in karate? And their face would light up. And they're getting ready to go for the black belt. How was that barbecue competition 3 weeks ago? And when we get done with the meetings, and senior team would come over and he says, how'd you learn all that stuff about these different people? Well, I says, I spend a lot of time in the field, and I ask them, because you're right on target about, and it's one, better things I've heard in a long time, being able to recognize those personal relationships. To me, when senior management gets viewed as a peer, everybody starts winning.
You nailed it, Mike. I think you're exactly right.
Cool. So for in closing, just from some of my notes, you want to focus on abilities to be able to hire the top talent. Any business problem, and candidly, probably any safety problem, is really a people problem. And the one I think I'm going to make a new bumper sticker for now, Matt, is make it easy for people to do the right thing. And then everything starts to flow. I cannot thank you enough for having you on the show today. We always, man, it's Vegas time, baby. You know the drill. I hope you have a great weekend. And once again, you can get a hold of Matt Pepsell right there on LinkedIn for Predictive Index. And I think he and his organization can assist any company that truly wants to make a difference in their leadership and how they engage with their people. Until next week, you guys have a great time. Be out there working safely. And they says, hey, how do we get a hold of Mike Kinney? Well, thank you for asking. Get him here at the office, 702-780-1410. Website is www.scstrat.com. Email, okay, this is easy now, mike@scstrat.com. And like Matt, I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. Until next time, and enjoy your safety culture journey. And we wish you all the best.